Welcome to this new episode of Sharing is Caring, the podcast that explores sharing.
Bienvenue dans ce nouvel épisode de Sharing is Caring, le podcast qui explore le partage
In all its forms. My name is Blue.
Je m'appelle
Today we
Blue.
will have an exciting discussion
Aujourd'hui, nous
about
aurons une
forest
discussion
gardens and then
passionnante sur
there.
les jardins-forêts et leur
Impact on the
sur
environment and
l'environnement et la
society with our
société,
guest
avec
Samuel,
notre invité
an
Samuel,
expert in these.
expert dans le
I would like to
domaine.
ask the Commissioner whether he is
Va
prepared to
nous
accept the
expliquer
amendments tabled by the
comment
Committee on the Environment,
culture
Public Health, and Consumer Protection.
transforme
Our
notre
relationship
rapport à la
with nature and
et à
food.
l'alimentation.
Settle down comfortably. It's going to be very enriching. Remember, if you like this podcast, share and subscribe to help us keep up with quality content. Good listening to you. Hello, Samuel. How are you? Hi, Ethan. Hi, how are you? How is it going today? Very well, thank you. What corner are you in? So me? I am in Côte-Pays, in the canton of Vaud.
Vous vous trouvez dans quel coin?
Alors, moi, je suis à Côte-Pays, dans le canton de Vaud.
Okay, it's not far from Geneva, Côte-Pays. It's almost Geneva. Yes, exactly. We're working a little bit on all of French-speaking Switzerland. Okay, it works.
Ça marche.
It works. Maybe you could introduce yourself to our editors who don't know what you do.
Pour nos éditeurs qui ne connaissent pas vos activités.
I'm Samuel. I'm 44. I'm married. I have a daughter. I studied engineering. And then, since 2019, I've made a conversion into the vegetable world, and more generally, of living, because it's a very broad subject. First, I was motivated by a need to get back to the earth, to do something. From my hands. We bought a small piece of land in the south of Burgundy, in Bresse, and we are. He soon became the owner of 5 hectares. It was a beautiful green landscape that unfolded before us. It was an opportunity for me to discover this world of forest gardens. I did a training with another association that is in France, next to the gourmet forest. Then I started working as a self-taught worker in the field as well. I had bought, which we still have. By the way, I'm continuing this project. I also have a little bit of experience in beekeeping. All these methods that can to be used. There are quite similar methods if you want a real aspect, and that's it. So it's immediately a phase of learning and discovery. And then, very quickly, the idea came to me to also deploy these forest gardens and all the similar techniques in the agricultural field here in Switzerland, with all the benefits that this can bring. Oh. I have 1,000 questions for you. What do you grow in Burgundy?
Vous cultivez quoi en Bourgogne?
So in Burgundy, it's on a forest garden model. So we're going to talk about it a little bit, but it's very diverse productions. So on the one hand, it's a micro-nursery work to make available in the region people who have interests as similar to young plants. Part of it, of course, I made up with trees that I initially bought, then seeds that I also bought from different places, to multiply these plants into trees that are large enough to be planted in the open. A little bit of grafting too, so that's part of what we grow. And then there's everything that's been put in place, which are examples of forest gardens to do that, and not just produce plants, but also put that in place on 5 acres of land. It was a large meadow with cows that were settled there. We sold the cows so we wouldn't have to keep compacting the land, so we'd have more space. There was already an orchard in place, a conservatory orchard that was densely populated with different species and other plant families as well, because orchards are still a kind of monoculture of rose bushes. There are vineyards, there are fisheries. And then what we've put in place is all these species that nature has given us. And they're quite incredible to discover: the caquillas, the mulberry trees, the morus, the cousins of the fig trees. Fig trees, also species that are rather melliferous, not necessarily edible, like the Brazilian Goya. There is a vegetable palette that is almost insignificant. This is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. Suddenly, another
Une autre
question.
question. Vous
You
avez dit que
said
vous
you
avez
brought
ramené
things from
des
Burgundy to
choses de Bourgogne
Switzerland.
en Suisse,
Some techniques.
des techniques.
Alors, oui,
Yes,
voilà,
it's because I started to discover the
ce que j'ai
hands in
commencé
the
à
earth,
découvrir
on the
les mains
ground.
dans la terre, sur le terrain.
For me,
Pour moi, c'est
it became quite
devenu assez
obvious.
évident. C'est-à-dire
It's a
ces
house, after
maisons
all, for
en forme
holidays and
de vacances et
experimentation.
d'expérimentation. Je
I
continue
still
un petit peu
live
en
in
Suisse, donc je
Switzerland,
fais
so I do a good job
la
of
navette
commuting
entre
between this region and
cette région
Switzerland.
et la Suisse. Et
Since I'm only Swiss by
comme je suis
birth,
suisse d'origine,
I'm French-Swiss
franco-suisse
after
même,
all.
je suis
I quickly became
assez
convinced that
rapidement
there was a lot of work to be done here
convaincu
in
qu'il y avait
Switzerland.
un travail à faire ici en Suisse,
In French-speaking Switzerland more generally,
plus
I thought,
généralement,
to raise
voilà,
awareness of the
mettre en
forest
place,
garden
de faire
concept
connaître le concept de jardin-forêt
and
et
actually
concrètement
put it
le
in
mettre en
place
place sur
on
des
private land,
terrains privés, des
communal
terrains
land,
communaux, des terrains
agricultural land,
agricoles, pour
to be able to show the general
montrer au
public
grand
all the
public les
benefits of
bénéfices
these green
de
spaces.
ces espaces végétalisés.
Okay,
Ok.
and
Du coup, on
suddenly
en arrive
we come to the heart of your association.
de votre association.
What is the forest
Qu'est-ce
garden?
que le
What does it
jardin-forêt?
consist of?
En quoi ça consiste?
The forest garden is a kind
Le
of young
jardin-forêt,
forest space.
c'est une sorte d'espace, de jeune espace forestier.
It's
Donc,
really
c'est
an
vraiment
inspiration of what's happening today
de ce qui
that's
se
more
fait
stable at the
aujourd'hui, plus
ecosystem
stable au
level,
niveau
which is
écosystème,
forests.
c'est les forêts.
Now, mature
Donc, les
forests,
forêts,
they're with
les forêts
canopies
matures, elles sont
that are very
des
high,
canopées qui sont très
so
hautes,
trees
ce
that
sont
are
des
very
arbres
tall
qui
that
sont très
capture
hauts, qui
light.
captent la lumière. Donc, il y a finalement
In the end, there's quite a bit of
assez peu
sunshine,
de
a little bit
soleil,
of light
de
hitting the
lumière qui
ground,
arrive au sol. Donc,
so
c'est
it's pretty
assez peu
unproductive in the
de vivre en
basement.
sous-étage.
The
Et l'idée,
idea
c'est
is to finally have a
d'avoir
young
finalement une
forest.
jeune
We're
forêt
going to keep
qu'on
it
va
in this young
garder dans
state
cet
by successive
état jeune, par
sizes.
des tailles
Once he
successives.
reaches
Une
that
fois qu'il atteint
stage,
ce stade-là,
we'll start
on va
by,
commencer par
if we
faire le
start from a
planter.
meadow,
On part
we're
d'une prairie,
going
on
to
va commencer
start
par
by
planter
planting various layers.
diverses strates,
So
donc
various layers of
étages de
vegetation in this
végétation.
prairie.
Dans cette
We will
prairie,
bring
on
these
va
trees
amener
to a
ces arbres à
size
une
that will then
taille
allow
qui
successive
permettra
cuts to be
ensuite
made.
procéder à des coupes successives pour garder
To keep this light entrance to the
entrée de lumière au
ground.
sol. Donc on a
So we have
des
basements
sous-étages
that are
qui sont
very
très
productive with
productifs
different
avec
environments,
différents milieux,
with different
avec
species,
différentes
different
espèces,
habitats
différents
also for a
habitats
whole
aussi pour
associated fauna and flora.
une faune et une flore associées.
So it's really about
Donc,
recreating this
c'est recréer,
hyper-stable and productive ecosystem state,
cet état d'écosystème hyper stable et productif qu'est la forêt,
which is the
à
forest,
une taille
at a
qui
size that
permet
allows it to be
de la
managed.
gérer, donc
I would like to
d'avoir
ask the commissioner whether he is prepared to
des
accept the
productions
amendments tabled by the
diverses.
Committee on Budgets. Okay,
Ok.
so the question I have for
Du
myself
coup, la
is,
question que je me pose, c'est
can
est-ce que
everyone
tout le
have a
monde peut avoir
forest
une
at
forêt chez
home?
soi?
I know it's
Enfin,
put a
je sais
little
que c'est posé de manière un
provocatively,
peu provocante,
but I know you're an
mais je sais
association.
que voilà, vous êtes une association, donc
So the
le but
purpose
d'une
of an association
c'est
is to
c'est
have
d'avoir des
members.
membres.
Do the
Est-ce que
members
les
of your
membres de votre
association have to
association doivent
have
avoir une
a
forêt
forest to
pour
benefit from
bénéficier
this
de cette
combination?
combinaison?
So, Jacques,
Alors déjà,
it's
c'est
important
important
to
de faire le
distinguish
distinguo
between
entre forêt
forest
et jardin
and
forêt.
forest garden. First, the forest, the primary forest,
La forêt
it
primaire,
has
elle a
largely
quand même
disappeared
largement
anyway.
disparu quand on
When you
regarde les
look at
images
the
satellites
satellite
du
images
plateau
of the plateau or of
de
Europe
l'Europe
in
en général,
general,
la
forests have been
forêt a
largely
largement
cleared
été
for the development of agriculture,
rasée pour les besoins du développement de l'agriculture,
for the
pour le
development of the
développement
production of this necessary
voilà, de
food,
la production de toute cette alimentation nécessaire pour
for the
l'arrivée
arrival of these
ces
civilizations
civilisations
that
qui vont
followed the great
succéder
glaciations.
aux grandes
So
glaciations.
it's
Donc c'est
something that
quelque chose
goes
qui remonte
back a
à
very
très
long
longtemps,
time,
évidemment.
obviously. We were still about 5 or 10,000 years ago,
Encore il y a quelques 5 ou 10 000 ans,
much
beaucoup plus
closer to
proche
the
de la
forest
forêt
than we
qu'on
are
en est
today.
aujourd'hui.
Now,
Maintenant, c'est sûr
it is certain that this forest,
cette forêt, on a
we have some
quelques
remnants of
restes de
forests that
forêt qui
exist,
existent ou qui
or
sont
that are
des forêts
more
plus
or
ou moins,
less cultivated forests.
on va dire cultivées donc en
In
sylviculture pour le
silviculture
bois
for wood,
essentiellement.
mainly,
Donc c'est
we
un
have
peu
two
moins le cas cette
opposing
fois. Aujourd'hui,
worlds.
c'est le monde de
Today, it's the
l'agriculture
world of
qui
agriculture.
on
We
cultive
grow
des
prairie
prairies,
plants,
c'est des plantes de prairie,
all the
c'est
cereals
là
we're
pour
going to grow.
cultiver.
And the
Le
world of
monde
the
de la forêt, c'est
forest,
un peu les
it's
deux
kind of the two models that we
modèles.
know.
Le monde
While the
des
world of
jardins
forest
forêts,
gardens,
c'est vraiment
it's really an integration,
l'intégration de ces
which is
qui est
intermediate
intermédiaire
between these
entre
two
ces deux
worlds with
mondes-là
young
avec
forests,
des jeunes
which
forêts qui
are
sont
much more
très
dynamic in
dynamiques en
terms
termes
of growth,
de croissance,
a very different type of
de
vegetation,
végétation, de
of
hauteur de
very different height
végétation
of
très
vegetation,
différentes
between the ground cover and the
entre le sol
canopy
et les plantes de
plants.
canopée.
So now,
Donc
it's still
maintenant,
relatively
c'est
easy
quand
to
même relativement
recreate these
facile de recréer
spaces in
ces
the environments
espaces-là
around us.
dans les milieux autour de chez nous, que ce soit en milieu
Whether in urban areas or
urbain,
not,
on a
there are
souvent des
often
parcs
parks
dans
in
lesquels
which
on
these
peut tout à fait
environments can
recréer
be recreated.
ces milieux. Ça peut
It
être
can
aussi
also
en
be in
milieu agricole, on
agriculture.
va
We're going to make
on
these
va du coup
two-dimensional
mettre à
meadows
disposition
available for other uses.
d'autres usages ces prairies en
We're going to return them for the use of forest gardens. We can also call it agroforestry in the agricultural environment to find environments that are closer and more stable and more resilient than this world of agriculture. Because agriculture is very energy intensive, it takes a lot of energy to produce the fertilizers that are used today in conventional agriculture. For all the mechanization, there's also energy that's being put in place. We also have all these techniques of food production which abuse the soils, which destroy them, which lead to erosion problems. Obviously, there is the whole question of phytosanitary pollution, which is also at significant levels today. This is one of the causes of biodiversity loss. It is clear that this agricultural model has reached the end of its rope. It is time to reallocate some of these surfaces for regenerative techniques, such as forest gardens, such as regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, which are the cousins of forest gardens. The forest gardens are more something that will speak to the urban world, or for landowners, large companies that sometimes have quite large areas of green space. The parks in the cities and villages. It's something that's pretty easy to put in place around schools that have green spaces as well. You don't have to be a landowner to have a forest garden. Okay, incredible. Thank you for the message. Very positive. On your website, there's a word that struck me, and that's the word abundance. I can get the impression that ecology or agriculture, or all these areas that we see a little bit of the city, without really understanding, are more for a decline, a reduction in production, etc. Could you tell us more about how you conceive of abundance? Yes. Of course, we're not talking about abundance in terms of GDP. We're talking about another model. It's an abundance that's really based on an environmental model. We're really going to try to recreate these microforests, these forest spaces, that here we leave them a little bit of space if we feed them with organic matter. If there's some human intervention in there, these spaces are extremely productive. It is certain that the counterpart is a fairly important manual work, an initial investment also to set up a number of plants, all these layers that must be planted, watered, paved, conducted with a number of cutting techniques at the outset as well. It's just to say that it actually takes an investment of time and energy on our part to put all this in place. But once the system is in place, it becomes extremely quickly productive. There are the first years, the little fruits along the paths, for example, that can be harvested. After a few years, we can have shrubs that will also make their first fruiting. Then the further we go in time, the more organic matter is put in place. The more we will have important productions on nuts, hazelnuts, all lianas like kiwi, figs, vine, kiwis, which are cousins of kiwis, for example. All these productions will be staggered over time until we have it. The first productions, for example, on major trees like the chestnut. The pecan nuts that grow very well under our latitudes are also trees that will produce from 5 years. We have an optimum production after 10 or 15 years. It's really a different perception of time. Today, we have a tendency to see 6-month productions. It's typically the capitalist or productivist world that we know, where we need to be able to sell wheat production in 6 months, so there's a lot of speculation going on around there. We really have time horizons that are completely different from those of forest gardens. It's just that if we support this model, which is much more abundant in the long term, the benefits will be reaped. This abundance is shifted over time. Maybe that's also what makes this model not dominant today. It's that we're a little bit driven by short-term gains today. Thank you so much for reminding me. I nod in admiration because it's really essential. We are in complete agreement with the points you have mentioned, and thank you for reminding us of them. What is the social impact of the forest garden model? That's the end of your slogan. The plant is the abundance at the heart of our societies. It is true that if we look at the challenges that lie ahead of us between climate change, the erosion of biodiversity, with all these problems of soil erosion, we are well aware that there are still major challenges. The first is to provide food for all of us. It's not me who says it. There's a lot of work that's been done by an organization called SDN, Sustainable Development Solution Network, which wrote a report called The Future of Food in Switzerland. Very clearly, it highlights the risks to our food supply. It's not very difficult to understand. We have half of our food today that comes from outside. In any case, it depends on external interests. I spoke earlier about fertilizers, which are essentially related to fossil gas. All the seeds too. Obviously, it's a globalized market, and then we import a lot of food that's directly produced abroad. We also have areas outside our country that allow the production of fodder or corn or soybeans, for example. Everything we eat in Switzerland today is not produced in Switzerland, so we are 50% dependent on foreigners. This point here means that there is a risk given that if we have climate change, it will also affect other countries, which will end up with productions that will vary. With the shocks that we can have in the markets, this globalized market is heavily dependent on each other. We are now heavily dependent on our neighbors, so there is a risk that we will have a number of shortages of certain foodstuffs. I would like to ask the President in Office of the Council whether he is prepared to accept the amendments tabled by the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs and Industrial Policy. We call on the authorities and institutions to take note of this situation. I think this relationship to the rest of the scenes I've talked about does it very well. We'll put the link in the episode notes. They have also drawn up a 4 or 5 phase plan to take the necessary measures to transform the food system. That's really the point behind it. Forest gardens are one of the responses to this plan, because it allows people to no longer just be food consumers, but to be producers. Today, that's only 3% of the population, farmers. So we'd really like to go back to something where people have a much stronger connection to food production, to meet this need to become self-sufficient in terms of food production. Once we've worked out this transformation plan, this means that there are a number of sectors that need to be developed. It means jobs. It means a number of investments which are important on the part of the state. Obviously, there are cantons from all communities to support this plan, and then it is still a hope and a really positive message. What we're going to do is we're going to say that these techniques are available. We have to get our hands on them now. That's why I think it's really an important issue to ensure this social cohesion, since all these risks that are there otherwise. I would like to ask the Commissioner whether he is prepared to accept the amendments tabled by the Committee on the Environment, Public Health, and Consumer Protection. We can see the different tensions that can arise. This is the model. Thank you, in any case, for calling everyone to play their part so that society, life improves.
Oui, merci en tout cas d'appeler tout un chacun à jouer son rôle pour que
I had another question.
la société, la vie s'améliore.
You mentioned at the beginning that there was a difference between French-speaking Switzerland and the Swiss-German cantons. Maybe, or I misunderstood. For me, the need is really at the national level. I think it's even at the European level. We don't have much difference from our European neighbors in general. What is important is that all layers of the population do this introspection and unfold this plan that has been proposed. This includes the agricultural sectors, which are changing rapidly today. We are talking about agroecology. It is a fairly wide range of techniques that are more in favor of the environment. There is also a lot of talk about agroforestry, which are ultimately the same principles as those proposed with forest gardens, with perhaps a more rational approach in terms of design, with cultural associations, large crops and woody plants. And then after that, we have all these agroforestry and regenerative agriculture techniques to return all of this organic matter to the soils so that the soils become carbon sinks and not carbon sources. But no, there's no difference between our Swiss-German friends and our French neighbors. It must be coordinated, I think, at the level of each territory, with the support of the states, of Europe in general, of course. Okay, so much the better, we're all staying at the same place. Suddenly, we arrive gently at the end of this interview. What do you like to eat? We talked about a lot of very delicious things. What are your ingredients? Your favorite dishes? It is true that the subject of food is so cultural. It is so linked to memories, to families, to regional stories. Today, I don't have a special diet. I don't particularly advocate veganism or all of those special diets. I think, very clearly, we have a diet that is much too fleshy. So I reduce my meat consumption a lot. I would say that I still consume a lot of dairy products, for example, which are also of animal origin. We can also say that these are areas where it would be necessary to reduce consumption a little bit in order to return to a much more vegetarian diet. No processed products. That's what I think is also one of the big topics for our health directly. All these processed foods are causing huge health problems today. And then back to much more nut-based sources of carbohydrates. I really like to eat almonds, Peking nuts. I talked about that. It's something that today is almost essentially exclusively imported from North America. But these are plants, so pasture trees, which are quite adapted to our cold climates, which hold quite -20, -25. So it's really something that we could develop here in Europe. I know that there are sectors that are developing, for example, in Spain, in France as well. So there are also market opportunities, even though I don't like to use that term, because it's a little bit what we're trying to fight against. But we have no choice. We must also develop new sectors so that these products meet the needs of consumers. So that's something that I think would be of interest in Switzerland. I like eating a lot of fruits, apples, etc. But now I've also discovered some interesting new fruits. There are passion fruits that are quite rustic in our country and that spend the winters without any problems, that are being developed. There is a nursery, for example, the Ubera on the side of German Switzerland, which is working on it. So I think it's also sectors that we need to start developing. These products, which are now typically imported from Vietnam, for the fruits of passion, for example, do not make sense when they could very well be produced in our country. There are figs. There are Brazilian guavas, which are also very rustic, around -15, which are fruits that grow in our country, which are really interesting, very fragrant. That's it. So I'd like to say it's pretty infinite as a world. That is for sure, it's the word infinite. It makes you want pecan nuts, Swiss passion fruit. That's all I ask. On that too, we totally agree. There are plenty of things that can be done. Last question.
Là-dessus
Any
aussi, on est
advice for
totalement
our
d'accord.
listeners
Il y a plein de
from the
choses qui
top
peuvent
of
être
your
faites et
experience with jardin
voilà.
forêt?
Ok, dernière question.
Yes, I think
Un
it's
conseil à
really
donner à
important to
nos
take
auditeurs
action without
du haut de
asking
votre
too many
expérience
questions or
avec Jardin
saying to
Forêt Suisse.
yourself, that's what I'm going to do
Oui, moi je
wrong.
pense que c'est vraiment important
I think you
de
learn a
passer
lot
à
by doing.
l'action sans
I've
trop,
had a lot of little successes, little mistakes we
poser de
learn.
questions ou de se dire ça y est, je vais faire
I
faux.
think
Je
we should
pense
take
qu'on
our
apprend
time too.
énormément en faisant.
Today,
Moi,
we
j'ai eu
have a little
beaucoup
bit of a
de
tendency
petits succès,
to get
des
caught up in
petites
time,
erreurs, on apprend.
especially a
Il faut
lot,
prendre le
I would
temps
say,
aussi,
of things that are a bit
malheureusement, on a un petit peu
parasitic in
une
our daily
tendance
lives,
à se faire
emails, messages, social
par le
networks,
temps,
where we end up
et du
spending a
coup,
lot of
générer
hours
des
on
choses
it.
un peu
I think
parasites
if
dans
we
nos
go back to
journées,
reading,
des
choosing
emails,
good
des
podcasts
messages,
like
des
yours,
réseaux sociaux, on
stories that
passe
are
finalement beaucoup
inspiring,
d'heures là-dessus. Je pense que si on revient voilà, à la lecture, à choisir des bons podcasts comme le vôtre ou
really to have
voilà,
quality
des
time,
façons de se former
things
en
that bring
ligne,
us information that will make us progress. For
voilà, des
me, that's
reportages qui
important.
sont inspirants,
But really taking
vraiment
action and
d'avoir
experimenting in the
du
field,
temps de qualité, des
I
choses
think
qui
it's
nous apportent
essential
des
to form a
informations qui nous font
collective
progresser.
too,
Pour moi, ça c'est
not to
important.
be alone in one's
Vraiment
corner.
de passer à
There's no
l'action et
need to make immediate
d'expérimenter sur le terrain, je pense que c'est
collectives.
essentiel.
Obviously,
Faire
it
en
can be
collectif
3
aussi,
people
de
on small
pas
surfaces
être tout seul
starting
dans son coin.
plantations.
Pas forcément
And
des
then to let it
collectifs, pas
go,
forcément des
not to
collectifs
want to
immenses,
control
mais
nature too
de 3
much.
personnes sur des petites surfaces
Also,
qui
to leave a
démarrent, des
place for the
plantations.
wild, sometimes just to
Et
observe,
puis de laisser
to
faire,
see the
de pas
plants.
trop vouloir contrôler la nature, aussi
They have this ability to
laisser une
manage
place au
themselves,
sauvage, des fois
to resemble themselves, to be
d'observer et de
spontaneous.
voir
So also
les
to leave a
plantes qui ont
place for the
cette
savage in all
capacité
this,
de se
and not
gérer tout
always
seul,
want
de
to
se
control.
ressemer, d'être
That's very
spontané.
good.
Donc aussi de laisser une place au sauvage, de pas
Yes,
toujours
I
vouloir
didn't indeed add anything.
contrôler.
Thank you. Okay, we're
Très bien.
still totally aligned on this. Excellent.
Oui,
Good.
j'ai
I
rien
am
ajouté.
glad to have the
Merci,
feedback from the listeners.
on est totalement
If they have any
là-dessus.
questions, comments, projects, or need
Excellent,
support,
je me réjouis
we're
de voir,
here.
les retours des
We're a young
auditeurs, s'ils ont des
association.
questions,
We're basically doing field
des
trips to people who
remarques,
have projects in
des
mind.
projets, besoin de soutien, on est là. On a une
It
jeune
can be at
association
various
avec,
stages of the
voilà,
project.
on
It
fait
can also
spécialement
be ongoing
des
projects to
visites
give a
de
little bit
terrain
of our
justement sur des
advice.
projets
It can be
en
concrete design
tête.
projects as well.
Ça peut être à divers stades du projet. Ça peut
We
être
have
des projets en
training.
cours,
We have various
de
activities
conseils.
as well with
Ça peut
conferences
être
on
voilà, des
subjects.
projets concrets de design aussi,
Directly on the
de
subject of
formation,
forest gardens or external
diverses,
speakers who tell us about subjects
et
that can
aussi
be
avec des
linked.
conférences sur
So
des
stay
sujets
tuned and follow us.
directement
There's
soit
going
sur
to
le
be
sujet des
some
jardins
news
forêts
this
ou
year.
des intervenants extérieurs qui nous parlent de
We have a
sites
whole range of trainings that have grown this
rester à
year.
l'écoute
We do the
suivez-nous,
laundry, we
mais
work on the soil subjects,
on
the
a
grafting.
toute une palette de formations
We're also
qui s'est
probably
étoffée
going to
cette
have
année. On fait de la
frescoes,
vannerie,
frescoes of
sur du
biodiversity,
sol,
frescoes of food, which are
des
really
greffes. On
important
va aussi
topics
avoir
related to forest gardens.
probablement des fresques, fresques de la
Contact us
biodiversité,
also
fresques
if
de
you want to discover the
l'alimentation.
forest garden of
Aussi, on a
Eoes,
des sujets
which is
vraiment
located on the estate of
importants
Socorros, which is next to Nyan.
Contactez-nous aussi si vous voulez découvrir le jardin forêt d'Eos,
We
qui
are
est le
happy
domaine
to
de
take a
Socor, qui est
tour
à
of
côté
this young forest garden.
des
It's
Indes, à côté
working.
de
The appointment
Arlésien, à côté
and the
de Lyon.
addresses are taken.
On fait
It'll
bien sûr
all be in the
le tour
episode notes.
de ce jeune jardin forêt.
Thank you
Ça
very
marche.
much,
Le
Samuel
rendez-vous
Dépraz,
et
for
les
your
adresses
time
sont prises. Tout
today.
sera dans
It was a great
les notes de
conversation,
l'épisode.
and I think we'll meet
Je vous
again.
remercie infiniment, Samuel
With
Dépraz,
pleasure. Thank
pour
you and good plantation. Thank you.
cette
Goodbye.
conversation et je pense qu'on sera
Thank you very
amené à
much.
se
And that
retrouver.
concludes today's
Avec
episode of
plaisir,
Sharing
merci
is
et bonne
Caring.
plantation.
Merci.
We hope you
Au
found our
revoir.
conversation with Samuel
Et c'est
as
la
enlightening
conclusion
and
de l'épisode
engaging as we
d'aujourd'hui
did.
de Sharing is
From
Caring.
Coppet near Geneva,
Nous espérons que
Samuel
vous
gave
avez
us
trouvé
valuable
notre
information
conversation
about
avec
forest
Samuel
gardens.
aussi éclairante et engageante que nous.
I hope your
Depuis
listeners were
Coppet
inspired to
Genève,
take action on your side to create
Samuel
a
nous a
better
donné des informations
and more
précieuses
sustainable
sur les
world.
jardins forêts. J'espère
See
que
you on the
les
next
auditeurs
episode
avaient
of the
été
Sharing is
inspirés à
Caring
agir de votre
podcast.
côté pour créer un monde
Keep an eye on our next
et
episode.
plus durable.
We will continue to
Rendez-vous
share
au prochain
stories,
épisode du
knowledge,
podcast Sharing
and
is
connections
Caring.
that matter to you.
Gardez un œil sur notre prochain
Until then,
épisode.
take care of yourselves
Nous
and keep
continuerons à
sharing the good
partager des
news.
histoires, connaissances et les connexions
See
qui
you.
comptent pour vous. Jusque-là, prenez soin de vous et continuez à partager les bonnes ondes. Ah,